Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special edition of Palantir Weekly. This is episode number 150. And on this episode, I am joined with Dominic, Matt Farley, Arnie, three people that have been covering Palantir with me for the past couple of years now. And we're going to be discussing one of the biggest milestones we've had over the past couple of years with a company that this podcast is dedicated to, Palantir. Getting into the S&P 500. Big day for shareholders, for investors, for founders, for employees. Basically, the subject of the podcast today, we're going to be talking about it, discussing it, analyzing it from every single direction. But it was a very, very fun day figuring out at about 5:30 that Palantir was officially added. So I'm going to go around the room and we're just going to get right into it and get started. Arnie, I want to start off with you. What was your raw reaction when you found out we got included?
Can I say, wow?
Yeah, but you can say a lot more than that. Wow. Me and Matt definitely yelled on stream this morning. So
now we discussed this for so long. It is almost a year that we have been talking. Hey, Palantir is now eligible. Theoretically, it could actually join the S&P 500. And every 3 months, it's like, come on, let's go. And finally, it happened. Now, we discussed a lot about what could happen from this, what are the implications, but the bottom line is what really matters is the perception of, okay, this is a serious company. This becomes, by definition, one of the key 500 companies to track in the global markets. And that is a very powerful signal. Now, we should not expect everything now to, whoa, because as we can share later, there is also a dark side of the inclusion. But so far, it's like, let's fucking go.
I love it. Dom, your raw thoughts when we got in.
Yeah, I thought they were going to announce this. I Googled because I really thought that this was going to happen on the announcement when it's supposed to happen, which is like the third week in September. And I literally was about to buy a bunch more shares this morning. I was like, I'll just wait till Monday. And then also I see it after hours, your post and Andrew Salmon's post. And I was like, well, I'm still happy. I got tons of shares and I don't think it will hopefully not rocket so much next week just yet. But to Arnie's point, like the real piece of it is that it's now going to get more exposure. More people are going to have to do homework on it. Because they are going to have it part of their portfolio. And I think it's just a big accomplishment for all the people who have been there for so long. And it's just another milestone to climb. They've been growing revenue so steadily for the last decade plus. So I think that we're still in early innings, but this is a really good place for people to start digging into it and having to take time, and analysts having to learn the company.
Matt, before you give your thoughts, I want to play this quick 35-second. Can you hear that? Oh, sorry. I want to play this 35-second clip of us actually figuring it out live, and then we'll get Matt's thoughts. To me, oh, we're in, folks. We're in. We are officially in the S&P 500 Palantir Technologies. This has been a long fucking journey. We are here in the S&P 500, folks.
Pretty dope. About time, huh? Congrats, everybody. That's absolutely phenomenal.
Matt, you experienced that with me today. What was your raw reaction when that happened?
It's still pretty surreal, right? I felt like the website was down, then we were waiting for somebody with the Bloomberg terminal, and then when the news kind of came in, I'm like, it's interesting, right? Because this is like my 7th, 8th, or 9th year following the company, 4th year following it from like an actual stock perspective since it's been directly listed, almost, I guess a couple weeks short of to the day. And it's really surreal. It's really fun. This is the first time I've ever really followed a company this closely from direct listing to when it's got accepted into the S&P. And I know some folks were able to do that with Tesla and it's fun. It's something that's a first for me. But I think overall, the thing that I'm most upset about with all this, instead of excited, is I think it's going to really reduce the beta on the company. And what the beta is like the volatility comparatively to the S&P. Because if you have so much money going into the S&P, people investing every single month, it's going to provide kind of a bottom support on the stock. And so, I hope that it doesn't happen, but I anticipate that you're going to see way less big swings up and down like we have been able to fortunately take advantage of over the past several quarters. So I still hope that's around, but it might be maybe less than in the past. And so in terms of a downside of all this, but yeah, congrats everybody. It's a phenomenal thing overall, regardless of my little pocket of negativity.
But I'm really wondering if this stuff of once you are in, the volatility reduces is actually truth or not, because it is since last year that or even before, when Tesla was supposed to enter, I heard a lot of once it will be in the S&P 500, then you will have more institutional buyers. They're more patient. The stock will calm down a little bit. But if I look at the actual examples, it seems like it's not really the case. And in some cases, it seems like it made the volatility worse. I have some charts that we can see for a reference if we want to, but maybe let's share previously what you want.
Yeah, I was just going to say right here, the top 10 holdings: Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Meta, Google, Berkshire, the other Google, and then Eli Lilly. So you've got these 10 companies that make up the majority of the S&P 500. They have the highest weighting. Palantir, I think, will be in the I think Steve was doing the math, like it'll be in the 22nd percentile of the S&P 500, something like that, given it's worth
it was like 170 or something like that. I forget what it was. It was in the between 100 and 200.
So it's going to have a significant weighting, even if it's not weighting like Apple or Nvidia. So then the question just becomes what the implication we think will be on, I guess, the stock. Go ahead, Arnie.
Let me point to something. Significant weighting means, as Matt mentioned, something between the 100, 150 ranking out of 500, but the real weight means is like 0.15. So at most, it's like 0.20. So just to confine expectations, is not that Palantir enters and then boom, it moves the S&P 500. I think it is more likely the other way around. And let me share the screen to discuss, I think, two dynamics, because the two key points when we talk about the S&P 500, excluding the real implications for the business, but just stock-wise, I think the two sides that the investors expect are, we will keep going higher. And the second one is, the volatility will actually reduce. And I made this simple experiment just while I was waiting to have a line when the last stocks that entered the S&P 500 were announced to enter the S&P, and what happened to the stock price. So now they're not really in order because I was not very organized in this work, but we can see like Airbnb, it was last year when it entered, and then so it had a nice bump at the beginning, then up and down. The volatility was more or less the same as before, and now is down. Blackstone entered the similar period. It had a very nice success. So now Blackstone is one of those cases where the S&P 500 created an initial bump, went down, and then it continued on its own way. KKR just entered, early to say, but here we see the unusual bump. Like what seems the hypothesis is like Palantir, when you get announced, you have a nice boom, and then the stock has its own direction. Confirmed by GoDaddy, which was announced, in this case, a very little bump, probably because nobody knew about what GoDaddy was. And now it continued its way. But the most interesting cases here, I think, are the last inclusions, CrowdStrike and Super Microcomputer, which we could say even almost stole the place for Palantir because they had the same conditions. But no. Let's include Super Microcomputer. Boom, like a crazy bump at the beginning. It was like 15%, 20% bump since the announcement, and then completely sucked since.
It's fell
CrowdStrike.
60% since. Yeah.
So
I mean,
I got a question for you guys. We're talking about the volatility, whether it's less volatile now that being in the S&P 500. I would say, to Arnie's point, it's going to be just as volatile as before, maybe even more because there's more money flowing in. For the simple fact that really you can equate volatility to the majority of the market not understanding a company. When you look at NVIDIA, most shareholders still don't understand that it's a software company.
Mm.
When you look at Airbnb, they think of it as a hotel company. They don't think of it as a software company. You look at Tesla, they think of it as a car company. You sure as heck know they're not going to do a lot of research to figure out what Palantir is. They're going to just say AI company.
Yeah.
And so I think when you look at volatility, and you could have volatility with great fundamentals, gives great opportunity if they have a good, fundamental balance sheet and growth.
So the question is, will Palantir will be more understood, or maybe the opposite?
I don't know. I don't know if people, you would think with all the money that poured into NVIDIA, do people really understand? It's pulled all the way back to 102. There's no rhyme or reason. They smashed earnings beyond belief, but we're just going through a cyclical change, right? We're going through a tech change. And the only reason Palantir wasn't read today was because they showed, we now are in the S&P 500. So I don't know. I think that we're still going to have good, in a positive light, we're going to still have really good buying opportunities eventually. They may be fewer and far between, but when they happen, we got to jump on it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The CrowdStrike and SMCI example Arnie brings up is really important because the whole point, theoretically, of getting into the index is to be less volatile because thousands and thousands of fund managers own the stock and they're not going to just immediately sell it off if there's some bad news. They want to have a long-term horizon. The whole point of the S&P 500 is to own it kind of forever, right? You're betting on America. You're betting on American innovation forever. But that's the opposite. Airbnb, very volatile. Tesla, it's been 4 years. Stock's been kind of dead, up and down, up and down. CrowdStrike down 60%. SMCI, they delayed their 10K form, down 30% in a week. So it is a good thought experiment because the volatility probably is not going to decrease. But that also means the volatility to the upside, if the company actually executes against their mission, which what NVIDIA, Amazon, Google, Apple has done over the past 10 years, it might take it to, in an extent that we haven't really thought of, if they can keep executing.
I think that's why it's so important that I really wish I knew this 2 years ago. It was the first time going through a serious plunge, right? Remember 2020, 2021, we got super euphoric results with stocks that were just like stupid valuations. Like Cloudflare pushed like 220 at one point or something like that. Just crazy. And for those who don't have a flawless balance sheet or tons of cash on debt or cash on hand and no debt, coming interest rate hikes and macroeconomics and world changing macroeconomics that could happen for 2, 3, even a full presidency term. It's those who can withstand that then come out better in the end, I think, with the volatility.
Arnie, go ahead.
No, well, personally, I don't complain of volatility. Actually, I'm only happy of volatility because once you know what you want, having a lot of volatility is just multiplying the opportunity both on the upside and on the downside. You just need to be more mentally calm. But if you think of it, like already a plus 7% in a day is like annualized something that has no sense. Okay, I was thinking something that I think is underestimated right now. Like, consider that we got a 7-8% bump on a day where the entire market was complete shit. Now, if we think that Palantir has a very high beta, this makes me think that if the market were red, were very green, like +2%, we would have had like a crazy bump, like CrowdStrike, super microcomputer, which touched +15-20%. So that's potentially the case if the market flips on Monday.
And there could also have some price increases coming from some of the banks as well, right? And we know there's generally a couple day lag. I know we just went through earnings, and generally they do that during earnings, but some banks might come out. I don't know if that's typical. I've never really seen one, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody comes out and says, hey, we're going for 35 or 38, and that gives a little bit more tailwind to the stock.
Yeah, I mean, this is why by the end of, let me show this tweet. By about 2:30 today, I mean, it was a bloodbath today. And if you're part of the market open, market close, you kind of like, we saw everything just collapse in front of us. But for some reason, at when did I tweet this? At 3:11 p.m., I was like, wait a second. This bad boy somehow made it through the depths of hell at 29.50, is green, and the market's down today. Like, the S&P 500 usually goes down 4% every September for the month. The S&P is down 4% in a week. So you would expect this to be a bloodbath, but no, it got propped up because of this idea that the market thought it would get into the S&P 500. So I think, Arnie, you have a really good point. It's like the volatility now continues to increase, but where does the macro take us? Because if the Fed cuts or they don't cut enough, like, is that enough for Palantir to withstand the pain of the macro and hold the 7% pump that we got that could fade away Monday or Tuesday?
So what are you expecting to do? Like, okay, we got a pump. What do you do?
Well, the pump was by traders. The pump was not by like the institutional ETFs that eventually we'll have to buy some September 20th and then every 2 weeks after that. So this trader pump we saw after hours up. Also, I mean, the 7%, it was at 32 like a week ago, right? So 30 to 32, it feels good for us to see that pump, but it's not anything real. It's not like it went to 37 or anything like that. I expect that could fade away pretty easily. But then I also think, why would it fade away if all these fund managers are getting ready to pile a bunch of cash into it? The only way it would fade away is if the macro gets so bad, which I don't think it's going to get that bad, but I could be wrong, that it would go down. But here, I guess the key point is, if we get back to 25 or 27, I think we all know that's a beautiful dip to engage in, right? Because now we're in the S&P 500, we're reaccelerating growth. Like, we know all the narratives, the moats that we talk about every single week. Now it's like, all right, if the market gives it to us, then give it to us.
We'll take it.
We'll take it. Agreed. Okay, so let's have this discussion. I want to ask you guys, how do you think the founders, Sham, Karp, Thiel, how do you think they feel about this moment? What do you think their implication of this moment is to them? We'll start with you, Dom.
Well, you saw Joe. I mean, Joe Lonsdale put out a post on there congratulating everyone on X, and I think it's not everyone. Very few people accomplish this feat, and so I think that there is definitely a feeling of accomplishment, whether they're there now or were there previously. It's a tight-knit community. I mean, there's so many people that have moved on to start their own companies and in pursuit to follow the same kind of success that Alex, Peter, and company, Steven, and all of them, Sean, started, and they're doing it at their own companies. So I think what's really impressive is that you've seen them lose so much talent over the last, 12, 24 months, and they're still, that culture is intact. They're still growing. They're still making sure that knowledge is being passed on. And I think they're all enjoying, for hopefully they say they held on to all their shares, because eventually that's going to really, we're still in early innings. So I think they're happy. I think they're thrilled. And it's just one of those things that you wanted to see happen as a founder. And now they've done it.
Arnie, how do you think the founders feel about this?
I think they're not really pumped for this stock because, okay, like that has a massive impact on their wealth, but I think it is a sense of realization. When you know you're valuable, you initially, the fact that people don't perceive you as valuable is what triggers you. But at the end of the day, you want to have some recognition, especially as you evolve, that you are making a good job. Now, this recognition is coming in different forms, like showing net income is also a reason to be proud, because it means clients pay you enough for you to say, oh, I'm profitable. That comes from the recognitions we got just last week. Forrester saying Palantir is the number one company in AI machine learning platform. Now, we can agree on certain things or not, but that's a very important recognition. And this recognition of Palantir being included in the top 500 companies is like, okay, we are officially among the big companies that make the history of America, and by definition, also we change the the direction of the world stock market and also of the economy. And I would say there are some secondary implications that I think could be very interesting to follow, because, for instance, if you shared just for a second my screen, I found very peculiar this. Sham last week participated at Y Combinator, the most important startup incubator in Silicon Valley, of which we know that Gary Tan is one of the early employee, is now the president and CEO. It was like an option there that they were craving to execute, because once you have this strong connection, it's like, okay, why we don't see more mix of we don't see more influence of Palantir somehow into Y Combinator. And I think at this time we see Palantir really went trying to, okay, we are confident that now we can spread, let's pump on our spread around, and becoming a company that presents at Y Combinator, now backed by the fact, oh, we are also an S&P 500 company, automatically puts Palantir in the same league of other big guys like Salesforce, ServiceNow. So I think from the founder perspective, this is what really matters. Like, we grind our back for 20 years, and now finally we are recognized not as the underdog company, but we are the big guys now.
I agree. I think they fought and clawed. I mean, the interesting thing is we as shareholders feel we were fighting for like respect, that no Palantir matters. But it always puts in perspective, the founders and the early employees were fighting for a decade plus to get the market to take them seriously, to prove that they had a real business. They failed many times trying to scale their commercial product, government product. And then they figured it out. They DPO'd. They did it the way Wall Street didn't want them to do it. AIP boot camps, that's not traditionally how you sell SaaS. They came up with a whole different way of selling, and Dom knows a lot about selling SaaS because he's been in this business, and they're accelerating growth, or re-accelerating. And it's a special thing to see them get to this point. Matt, how do you think the founders feel about this, given that you talked to not the founders, but a lot of the early employees in 2017 when you were implementing?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I talked a little bit about, my experience and how everyone has their unique connection to the stock in their own way. So I won't repeat that. But I think the thing that makes me happiest to see as a bystander and as a stakeholder and shareholder in the success of Palantir so far is the validity that those guys get, right? I mean, they really focused on product. And as Arnie said, it's 20 odd years at this point that they've really been focusing on it, since 2003. And now they're able to really reap the rewards of that. And I think that it shows a testament of they focus not only necessarily about creating value, but they really focused on creating a product that is, in my opinion, going to be something that changes the course of history going forward. And I know a lot of people probably scoff at that, but I truly do believe that how our business at UDoc operates is completely different than when Palantir got involved. And I'm fairly confident that a lot of the other people that have presented at AIP cons, Foundry cons, like the Cleveland Clinic, Jacobs, etc., they've all operated, Tyson Foods, they've all operated very differently since Palantir has partnered with them. And, I will go as far as to say, obviously the validity part is nice, but I think Dom hit something really cool that I think we skipped over, which is the culture at Palantir is unlike any other. And to me, it almost feels like it's the second coming of the PayPal mafia. And I think a lot of people might not necessarily understand what I mean by that. If you think about what happened at the PayPal mafia originally, you had Peter, you had Elon, you had a lot of these friends come together, and they all went off and they all did their own things, right? They all took their money and they ran and did their own things. But people that come into Palantir, they're almost like in their own little incubator, right? You can kind of create whatever software you want to. And if you really feel strongly, you have that entrepreneurial mindset, you really want to do your own thing, you can leave and start something up like Endural or something like that. They're not going to stop you. But I think that they give you the keys to the kingdom and say, you can do whatever you want here at Palantir. You don't need to leave. We're here to kind of create businesses and operating system for businesses that really make them different. And so you have literally the world at your fingertips to change and implement value and efficiencies into companies that you probably wouldn't have at Microsoft, Google, or a lot of these other opportunities. And so to me, I think that they're allowing the culture to really harvest that entrepreneurial mindset that they had at PayPal, and really allow that to feed into the whole entirety of the culture at Palantir. And I think it's really cool.
I would agree. Arnie, I'll share your screen right here.
Yes, it's great that you mentioned this, because very recently, so this just a few days ago, a research professor from Stanford shared this chart, essentially underscoring how Palantir is the top one company that, compared with the number of employees, had the biggest number of people who left to fund a company, but to fund a company that became a unicorn. So it's like a metric of success. Now I saw also a similar picture called like the Palantir Talent Vortex, underscoring the same thing. Like Palantir, also Carp mentioned, the Palantir degree is becoming more valuable than an Ivy League degree. And what I found very peculiar is this aspect that in a normal company, if you work there and you try to express some inclination of, I really want to build something, typically that's something that you need to hide the more you can, not, you know what, I feel so confident now that I want to share it. And we were discussing about this dynamic because from a shareholder standpoint, it seems like, wait, we are actually wasting our opportunity to invest into these startups. You are actually training people, then they leave. And I think we got a very interesting point from the conversation with Matt Babin that we had the honor and pleasure, as you say, to discuss with the other day, underscoring that Palantir is actually happy when they have people who leave to do something on their own. And I was thinking, why should the company be happy if your best talents actually go and somewhere else? And I think for two reasons. First, you get the recognition that what you do at Palantir truly matters. So that over the short term is just annoying, but over the long term, it starts creating this myth of, Palantir, they are so good, they are so talented that if you train there, you definitely deal with most complex use cases, most complicated problems. Then if you're able to solve them, you become so confident that you can do a $1 billion company, which is like the ultimate dream for people in Silicon Valley. But there's also another dynamic that I think is more psychological. What I mean with that is, if you work in a place and you start having some inclinations that go against the natural working environment, then you have two choices. It's like, or you pretend you don't have that entrepreneurial pressure, or you just suffer. But if you feel in your place, meaning that, okay, I'm here contributing, doing my best work here at Palantir, but I know that if this entrepreneurial spirit emerges, I would not be discriminated by, encouraged. That makes me like Palantir even more.
That makes the culture very special.
Palantir is not here to oppress my inner feelings, my emerging skills. Yeah. But I feel encouraged. And I think of this creativity, like this word that you say, perfectly fits with all the topics of, we are a colony of artists and so on. Because I already feel it as a creator. When I'm forced to do something, I can do that, but I know I would not do it the best way I can. But when I wake up without the need of, now I need to make research on Palantir because I need to write a report, but I make it because I want to, knowing that potentially I could not, makes me the process of doing that even more special. And I think this is a subtle but very important implication of this culture.
I would agree.
Yeah, I would say the flip side to that in a positive way is, I remember talking to one of their sales account execs, and he was only 2 years in, and he was like, working at Palantir is like getting your on-the-job MBA. You'll learn more in 2 years working here than you would getting a full degree. And the other piece, the flip side of that is you have to be flexible at Palantir. Things change very rapidly. It's a very flat organization, and it's very fast and nimble. So innovations that would maybe make the cogs better, maybe make the company more efficient, could reduce roles, or your role changes. The hierarchy in the company, there really isn't a set structured hierarchy. So you have to be able to roll with the punches. And if you think you're just going to sit here and collect a paycheck and hide, you will be exposed, right? So it definitely is a culture where accountability, they do a really good job of hiring people and making sure that they hire people that will hold themselves accountable, so they don't have to worry about that.
So let's end it off on this question. This is going to be a shorter pod, guys, because this is really the only topic we're going to talk about. But let's see where this question goes. What's next for Palantir? S&P 500 up 90% year to date, GAAP profitable. Obviously, they've proved they can reaccelerate growth. Got a $480 million contract last month. Beat Raytheon for a Titan contract. We can think about it for 30 seconds. Also, the chat. Let us know in the comments. How would you determine what is next for the trajectory of this company?
I can start if because I kind of
said
it earlier. So I mentioned this earlier with the pod. I guess after the close when we kind of found out. And to me, I was kind of sitting there wondering, it's like, well, the cash position is only going to get bigger and yada, yada, yada. And to me, I was also starting to think, it's like, well, I feel like they almost took an opportunity about 18 to 24 months ago to they were getting so much hate from Wall Street about lack of profitability and, when is that going to happen? You're a 20-year-old company, yada, yada, yada. I think that they almost took that opportunity to right-size the organization a little bit, reduce headcounts, and make sure that they were the most efficient that they could be to get GAAP income profitable. Because I think originally people were expecting GAAP income to show up in 2025. And I think it was a sore point for them to keep getting, hammered by analysts and not necessarily have that GAAP profitability piece. And I think that may, and I could be wrong, this is strictly speculation, of course, that may have put an impact on to why we saw only the single teens sort of growth rates, right? I mean, if you were able to continue to grow your sales team, your forward deployment engineers and the like, then you can continue to grow revenue much faster. But I think that they took the path of, let's right-size the organization. Let's make sure that we're not getting frivolous with our capital or our OPEX and our headcount. And we actually focus on returns for the long term, make sure that it's a right-sized organization and capitally efficient for the future. then we can get back to growth. And I think that that's where we're at right now. So to be frank, I think we could be getting back to a place where we're mid-20s to low 30s% growth for a rather extended period of time. And the only reason why we might have paused is because of that focus on profitability over the last 2 years. Now that we're profitable, now that we have kind of $4 billion in the bank and we have a little bit of that net income to help us with that, now they can focus on what they do best, which is going out, vertically integrating across companies and getting into new industries and stuff of the like. I honestly think that what's next as well, I think that there's probably 2 or 3 additional products that they'll bring on before 2030 that will be stuff that people didn't even expect. I think Warp Speed is going to be phenomenal. We haven't heard the end of that yet, and I'm really curious to see how much of an impact that will be. But there's plenty of smaller, mid-sized companies that generate 25 to 40 million that work in manufacturing and could use a product like that that really focuses on efficiencies and modeling out your outputs, whether you're making cabinets, whether you're making a bunch of other different things. I'm curious to see how a 3D representation of your factory floor can really help you in maximizing that efficiency. But I'm sure there's countless of other products that are in the works that we'll be hearing from.
Yeah, and I think one of the big points you made is they were so focused on profitability for the street that now that that's done, reacceleration on growth is going to be the focus, and the different diversity of use cases with new products probably is where we get the next avenue of growth. Dom, what do you think is next for Palantir?
I think Matt said a lot of things on point there. Partnerships and scale is really the next stepping stone, right? They've been very maniacal and good stewards of their growth and money to keep the profitability in line and not overspend. I still think that they will hold it close to not ever have a quarter. I mean, the market's unforgiving. If they were to have a quarter where they're not profitable, also the market would throw their hands up in the air. So, but I do think they're going to unlock the developer community with their free. We can all just sign up for it now at builders.palantir.com and try it out. I think they are going to continue, as Lunar said, partnering with the big hyperscalers, find some different use cases. And definitely by 2030, I think we're going to see definitely some new products that are game changers. But I think they're going to figure out how do we accelerate growth with headcount, right? Because it's a special person you got to hire. But once they get them in there, and if they can really get the amount of, because they're not opening everything up right now, right? I mean, like they can't take all the demand in, because what would that do? That would lose the customer experience. That would lose all of what they've built for so long in what makes them customer focused. They need to keep that culture intact. And the way you scale quickly is through partners and maybe even some of their former people who go start other companies. Maybe they buy them. Maybe they're on mission, right? There's a lot of possibilities, but somehow I think we get to scale eventually in the next 24 months where we're starting to talk about 30% plus growth rates.
Arnie, what do you think is next for Palantir?
I would underscore first what you mentioned that really resonated with me. Like, Palantir is not that kind of company like Snowflake trying to do everything all together. Let's switch a CEO, but let's do also a lot of M&A, but let's run some random products here and there. Palantir tends to be like very methodical into do one thing right at the time, and once that works, then they go on the next step. Like code is beautiful because it doesn't go all together. It's like, even if we see the experience is smooth, the execution is like bam, 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 bam. And I think, as you mentioned, the steps are there. Like, okay, let's focus on profitability first, because that is the one thing that we can manage. And if we can manage it, we get more recognition from the street, but also clients could be more comfortable into having us manage like $100 million per year potentially of software spend without knowing, you're not going to collapse. Then you have the acceleration of growth, But if you think of it so far, what is important is this acceleration of growth mainly comes from an organic work Palantir has been focused on. It's not that the stuff was shit and then they started making partnerships with everyone and then growth arrived. It was more like, okay, let's focus on profitability. Let's focus into having an offering that sells itself. We are very efficient to promote with boot camps and so on. So organically, we work. And only now, the focus I expect to be, okay, now we have the good recipe. Let's scale this recipe into the biggest numbers possible. So now let's focus into the channel partners. So people like CodeStrap, Ontologize, all these other guys that essentially are the extension of Palantir in terms of employees, in terms of deployment, but not internal to Palantir, so that Palantir becomes like that maniacal product-focused company, and the implementation is more related to these third-party sites. So I think there are two dynamics. On the stock dynamic, coming from the S&P 500 that we discussed a lot, there could be ups and downs, but whatever, fine. In terms of business, I think everything can be accelerated thanks to this, because what we are seeing right now is Palantir being an outlier. I always scratch my head toward these statistics, because if you look at what is happening in the general software side, people are actually complaining that, oh, the software looks kind of dead, rather than accelerating. Now the aggregate cloud software expenditure per quarter in terms of annual revenue, annual recurring revenue, is essentially flat, is not really growing. And you see posts like this guy, tech investor for 20 years, but means completely Palantir. So, quoting Altimeter, another top tech investor who completely missed Palantir, saying that no more excuses. The industry is now firmly at the top of the S curve, hinting that, okay, like the best times have already gone. The best teams, companies will get it and manage their business accordingly. The real players are under earnings by a lot. And okay, what if there is already a top player that is emerging while all the industry is kind of stuck? We have a company like Palantir that is literally expanding the growth, reaching the top tier of the growth, while also reaching the top tier of the free cash flow. What means with that is if it happens that Palantir starts taking off on his S-curve, I think we could have a real possibility of seeing some massive explosion into the growth. Because so far we are kind of mentally stuck to the 30% growth. But what happens if this channel partner really are excited to sell Palantir, this kicks off, and there is not that too far, Databricks with more or less similar revenues, a bit less now, but still growing 60%. And I keep asking myself, why shouldn't Palantir also grow 60%? Now, I don't say it will happen, but I'm thinking, if the organic growth already brings us to 30% in a context where companies are not really throwing money into IT, the rates are still relatively high, there is no real hype on the software side, we see hype on the hardware side, plus we have all this leverage from more visibility from S&P 500. That is not a key factor, but I think it helps. Meanwhile, you have this emerging partner ecosystem, which it is like a multiplier of the efficacy of Palantir, because if Palantir succeeds, also the resellers are very happy to resell. All the resales happen very fast because, oh, Palantir is not that black box company that you have no idea what it is an S&P 500 company, very profitable, very successful, because it is growing while also doing very important stuff. So why should we not grow 60% now? I think at this point is more a thought experiment, but why not?
But I think building on top of that, Arnie, I think you're 100% right? You have that that partner relationship that's going to help start building things. But Babin said something really intelligent that I know that we all kind of already know this, but they sometimes get into partnerships with some of these folks in certain industries to say, you're our exclusive partner for, say, 4, 5, 6 years. And so who's to know that when they got with Ferrari, they said, hey, we'll get with you and be your exclusive partner for 4 or 5 years. Once that partnership's up, maybe they're taking over the entirety of F1 and running the operating system for all the F1 systems, right? Who knows? That's a possibility. And other items in there that aren't necessarily thought of as of yet. What industries do we not necessarily know of as of yet? Like, what renewables companies are there? Is there exclusive partners with those renewables companies? So things like that. And then also, I think that there's a solid reason as to why Palantir doesn't show this, but I'm fairly certain that a large percentage of the customers that actually get signed up to Palantir do get a either extremely cheap contract price of, say, $1, or maybe something frivolous as to $1,000, or even free, just to be able to see what sort of use cases there might be at, say, a university, or at, say, a cancer treatment center, or anything of the like. And I anticipate that a lot of those countries or companies have yet to really start getting hit with a bill, because they're still trying to infiltrate. And I think that that's a smart thing by Palantir to do that, because otherwise those people might not necessarily want to sign up for something that's really kind of out of the box, or that's probably not the right term, but customizable, and not something that's just handed to you and spoon-fed to you. It's something that you kind of have to work and develop your own systems and operating systems and see how it works for you. But I think also it's kind of a catch-22, because if you share that with everybody, then the street's going to be like, you're giving stuff away for free, right? We're all about making money here. Why aren't you? But I think it's almost in the long term a better opportunity, because then you're truly seeing the power of the programs. You're seeing the power of the operating systems, and it's also allowing you to figure out what other potential warp speed like applications or operating systems are out there. If you don't have the opportunity to enter a specific industry, it could be a complete vertical that you miss, that you might not necessarily be able to make a custom operating system for, right? I mean, you think about it, we have an operating system for decision-making. We have an operating system for the modern enterprise. We have one for software deployment. Now we have one for manufacturing. Who's to say that there's not going to be an operating system for banking or currencies that gets made going forward, right? So I think there's a piece where I think you're right, Arnie. You can't necessarily say that 30% or 35% is the limit. It could be much more than that, depending on if some of these exclusive partnerships come to an end, and also we actually start getting some of these verticals or free customers to sign up for $50 or so million deals. I don't know who has these free contracts, but I'm sure there's many countries out there, Finland, many others, that we have yet to see true hardcore deals signed up with. Maybe it's because it's confidential. Maybe it's just because it hasn't happened yet. But I'm sure that those are deals that are worth tens of millions of dollars a year that have yet to be solidified. A lot of that's
think about your point. They know their COGS on their cloud bill, right? So if your product is really good, which we know it is, and they know their product's good, and it delivers quantifiable, proven ROI, and I know I'm going to save this energy company millions of dollars, I am willing to eat a couple mil up front, because I know if I have the capabilities to shut it off and you've already received value, you're going to be like, whoa. Hey, Matt, I want to keep this going. This is what I found, like 3 different use cases. I can't you can't pull the rug with that. Well, that's going to cost. All right. You've gotten the value. You see what we deliver, and it's a consumption model. And so it's fair as long as it's giving you alpha. Remember years ago, we'd see, we always talk about alpha. It's still on the website. If you're getting that gap of alpha, then the value is being delivered. You're willing to pay that because you're getting the alpha. And so I think the next evolution, like you and Arnie were saying, was going to start seeing them really narrow down these industries and have an operating system for energy, have an operating system in healthcare. I think healthcare will probably be the first one, considering that they have like 28% of the medical beds in the US. So It'll be interesting. It's gonna be a fun ride.
Can we share the seconds of sorry, this
Oh,
rewind.
Streamception.
So we did Arnie and I got a chance to talk to Matt Babin, who is the head of Palantir Energy this week. Chad and Ilyano, shout out to them. They set it up. And again, the company's starting to engage with us even more with some of these head officials getting to talk to us and explain what they do. So Arnie, I'm assuming you're going to play a clip from that podcast.
Yeah, like we all know that BP was an important client, one of the earliest clients, but I think we underestimated a dynamic that I thought of it with Airbus, so preventing Palantir to work with Boeing. I didn't think at all that Palantir could have this.
We can't hear it, Arnie.
I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't?
Yeah.
Oh, so could you play the clip?
Just share screen again with audio. You probably have to press share screen again. Yeah, share screen, and then it'll say a tab. It'll say also share tab audio at the end, at the bottom.
Okay, here.
Was on
Now?
us to prove that the software was valuable. He said, like, I'm going to give you an introduction to people who own problems. I'm going to, unlock data for you to have access to, but I'm not going to tell people they have to use your software. That's on you to prove your way. And so we rolled that out to every operating region they've had, and then that sort of just, compounding on the ontology that was built out led to more and more work on production optimization and on drilling and a whole bunch of other things. What's really unique about this was that the arrangement we had was exclusive with BP for the better part of a decade. So the agreement we signed with them was we can't do anything else in the field of oil and gas. We did a lot of work in renewables. We did work in wind and solar and hydro. We got into utilities as we built up our commercial business, but it was exclusive in the field of oil and gas up until 2020. So
Matt, I'm curious. Internally in the company, when you were exclusive on one client for oil and gas, was that kind of annoying to be exclusive with one company and not being able to venture out, or do you guys think that gave you so much time to get the R&D necessary to work with BP to prove real results that in the future you could scale to other clients?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. In hindsight, it's frustrating, but at the time, this is a world. Maybe this is another thing to note. This was before Foundry existed. So we were using, Palantir Gotham as a backend and then building our own custom software on the top of it for how to stream fiber optic data from 10,000 feet below the surface of the earth, which was definitely not what the Gotham backend was designed for, to be clear. So it, I think at the time we were really focused on, maybe in general, one of the principles we have here is like, it's hard to do, the more things you say you're going to do, it's hard to do them all well, right? When we hire people, we don't want to turn people into like well-rounded game players. We want people to be the best at the position on the field they're asked to play. And so at the time, I think the best thing we could do was really deliver the most value for BP as a partner.
There you go. Yeah, I think that was so special to hear him talk about that, because I think all of us knew they were exclusive with BP, but we officially got the confirmation that for almost a decade they were exclusive with them.
I mean, that's a lot.
That's a long time, dude. Yeah.
That tells you so much about their culture and their belief in their product and what they're trying to achieve. That tells you the long-term mindset of that executive team. And for everyone to realize this is not a fly-by-night, turn a quick buck. Because they knew they were going to get in after doing that with BP. Hey, all bets are off. We're going to be working with Chevron, ExxonMobil, everybody else, but you got a 10-year lead. It's pretty special.
And I think that was one of the cool things working at UDOC. When Foundry was kind of really just getting its feet on the ground, there was very few applications that were built, and so then it was like they said, really bare bones. And then when you were able to actually go and they were starting to work with, I think, like trying stuff out with GM and trying stuff out. They would change the functionalities on the fly. It was actually pretty cool because like over a weekend, they would come up with a new feature and it would just be like, yep, we worked with another client and we saw X, Y, and Z, and we think you guys would like it. And we'd give them feedback and they would adjust it. And sometimes it would work specifically for our organization. And it was like, oh, really cool addition. Or sometimes it would just be like, not really. But I think the thing that mattered most was those constant conversations with the engineers to say at the end, and this is something that I talked about a lot with Iliano at dinner. It was all outcomes. Like they didn't care about creating the software and leaving. They said, how is this going to impact your outcomes? What do we need to do? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? How can we make it more efficient? And they legitimately created Foundry on the precipice of that. And to anybody that's sitting here being like, Palantir doesn't know what they're doing, they legitimately made an operating system on the fly to accommodate UDOC and several other companies, and they grew it from scratch. And that was however many years ago, and it's literally only been less than a decade since. And it's really cool to see how it's kind of taken its own light, or taken on its own flight path. And you have now Apollo, and you're now going to be coming out with Warp Speed, and then AIP to be integrated on top of all that. It's just insane how quickly they're moving compared to, I would say, the first maybe 12, 15 years where they were really trying to get the software down and trying to get, maybe the culture right and what's actually going on. And some of those other things that would really keep the company alive, maybe some of those big contracts. And then they found a few commercial contracts and they really ran with it. And that's really been the actually breadwinner for the company since.
Like where this conversation brings me is to a question I got the other day when I participated to a podcast with an Italian
I was in there. You were spitting hot Italian fire. I had no idea what he was saying, but I heard Palantir, and I was like, oh, Palantir.
I actually see a very wild difference from how I speak in English compared with
dude. You were like, you were like, I had never heard you more like in tune because it's your native language, so you're just zipping through it. You hear nothing, but then I hear Palantir. I was like, oh, I'm a Palantir. Okay, good.
And the question was the usual question people have is like, what makes you think Microsoft doesn't come up with a competitive product? What about the competition? And my thinking was exactly related to some dynamics like this. Imagine these guys worked for years, like literally with BP's best people to build a suit that is tailored for them, but that can be extended to potentially everyone. And in order to do that, you need to be, I think, unlisted, having set the tone right with also your investors, because doing this crap takes a lot of time. Like Babin was explaining, we were using Gotham to essentially build the Foundry. And then in the following part of the interview, which I encourage everyone to watch, I asked, okay, but why they took so long? Because it was all it's a series of unsolved problems that you needed to manage to solve. And you can really try to build a platform that is so comprehensive, at the same time so deep, only when you have the time to do the right stuff and not to deliver the stuff that increases your revenues in the next 3 months, like Snowflake did. Same product, easy sales. Palantir did the opposite, which was a sort of a curse for many years. But now the product is, we can't say finalized because it's never finalized, but is at the stage where, okay, now it can be massively deployed, as Danielle underscores. Now we are at warp speed. The new offering can be deployed at warp speed, and they can substitute potentially big software companies that are now dinosaurs. So all this dynamic makes me think, okay, Palantir has been working for 20 years, 20 long years. But we are now at the point where we can see the cumulative effect of these 20 years, and we have the luxury to be here now at the inflection point.
You know, I think the older I get, the objective truth to winning in life is going deep, not wide, meaning depth over breadth.
That's
because
deep.
that's deep, right? Yeah, deep. Right? And this
No,
actually,
okay, we might want to end it on that one.
no, but this
I see this getting to a philosophical.
No, but this has to deal with Arnie as well, because so they worked with BP for a decade, right? Went super deep on that relationship. That's why I interrupted Matt in that spaces, because I had to ask that question on, were you annoyed, or did you think, hey, this is like a really big learning opportunity? And ultimately he's like, yeah, I'm annoyed because we couldn't take on other clients, but we learned so much. I remember Arnie and I in May of 2022, Arnie remembers this. I've said this story many times. We get on a Zoom call, stocks at $6. Arnie and I obviously are trying to build our brands as content creators. And Arnie and I both are like, all right, the stock's in the gutter. Sentiment sucks. But we know one day this stock's not going to be $6. Maybe Wall Street thinks it'll be $6 forever and they've given up on it, but Arnie and I didn't. And we were like, we need to go deep on building an audience that cares uniquely about Palantir, because we're obsessed with it. At the same time, Arnie and I were thinking of like, well, we should cover other companies, other stocks, other, other macro things. And after that Zoom call, we both realized, well, why? If we know Palantir's a winner, the market disagrees with us right now, but that's the whole idea of taking a risk. One day the market might agree with us. And we're the two guys really talking about it in depth every single day, creating content, articles, videos. Then that's going to be a moat around our creator brands that's going to be unpenetrable when the stock's at $32 one day. And that's what happened, because we went super deep on that one thing. So even from a content creator perspective, it's like, hey, you can talk about a billion things, but what do people really care about? Oh, they care about this subject. Oh, can you give them real valuable content day in and day out on that subject? Can you give them value? Exactly, for them to come back and then build that brand, and then you can diversify. Now Arnie talks about Airbnb and people are curious about what his thesis is because they trust him on analyzing a company, because he analyzed Palantir for 2 years straight and obviously analyzed it in the right way. So I think this approach that Palantir has of going deep in one industry, defense, space, energy, logistics, and then the trillions of other industries they can attack, if all of those become independent verticals that they've gone so deep on, and they're each independently growing 10, 20% to a cumulative growth rate of 40, 50, 60%, the sky's the fucking limit for this company. And I don't think a lot of other SaaS companies can replicate that.
And I think the other piece about it is they're focusing on the outcomes, which literally means infinite total addressable market, right? I mean, if you think about, if you create a piece of software and you try to fit it into a company, it's like, well, it may work, it might not, right? But if you have the opportunity to sit there, mold it as you see fit, and really try to understand, hey, we have this idea and data engineering sort of perspective, and you have this 100-year-old company that obviously has a lot of talent and a lot of legacy systems and know-how. If we combine them together, we can create an operating system that's right for you. What other better piece of software can you create, right? You could try to buy anything you want from Microsoft. You try to buy anything you want from Google, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be tailored directly for you. And it goes back to what Dom was saying, which is once you've built an operating system that they literally depend upon every single day,
You're stuck.
You're stuck, right? UDOC can't just walk away after using this for the past 6-7 years. And like, I don't even know where UDOC would begin, right? If you compare us against our competitors, against lifting costs, and they quoted a lot, UDOC's lifting costs and how they've been able to impact that, then, you're sitting there like, why would you walk away? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Why would you not read Arnie's newsletter after 2 years once you're hooked on it? It's like, it is so special to get good at something and then be known for that thing and then keep going from there. And I think that's what the AIP boot camps have been. Like, the AIP boot camps are so genius because they're like, hey, we know we're the best. In 2022, all four of us on the same podcast were like, we know they're the best. We know they're better than everyone else, but they can't sell. And the AIP boot camps was like, hey, we're just going to sell with the product. And they ended up selling a lot by proving they're the best to people, by giving the value before asking for the dollar. And as a result, they're getting more dollars.
Well, yeah, and I think as long as they don't stray, and I don't think they will, unless leadership changes, that the customer is telling them what they need to solve problems. As Matt said earlier, they always come. I've been on 3 different sales calls trying to pitch them to different companies that I've worked with or for. I need a AT&T. I have my Palantir hat. I just don't look good in hats. I just don't. I got my Palantir.
You look great. You look.
I have a weird shaped head, but no. As long as that's what attracted me to them, was putting the customer first and hearing the customer and hearing the problem and putting the work in to get to an outcome. There are so few. I'm telling you guys, there are so few companies that do that and care about that and play the long game. And that's what attracted me as a shareholder.
Mm-hmm. I do remember that great piece Joe Lansdale wrote about the lessons he got from Peter Thiel. And among the top lessons, there was something like, don't never interrupt your compounding, your primary compounding function. Keep building on that, because every change is very costly. Because
keep
if
the
you
main
keep
thing, the main thing, essentially.
And the only way you can add another real curve is when you really realize, okay, now it makes sense, because the upside from this stuff working is so big that is worth taking. And I think we see now the emergence of all this Peter Thiel thinking. And there is another part that I really liked of the chat that makes us think why this company is special, because it relates to something also Sham shared last week. Can I share the screen again? Tell me if it is working, please. Working?
This is the Matt Babbins still.
Yeah, it's still working.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yep.
Okay.
We talk all the time internally about being like an and company. And we like to call out where we think people are forced to make these trade-offs that are false. I think that the first one was in the U.S. context, right? Sort of the driving force behind the founding of the company was you shouldn't have to choose between counterterrorism and national security and data protection and privacy. And at the time that we came out and were sort of forceful about that in 2003, 4, or 5. That was sort of an alien perspective. It was like, well, you're either with us or against us, right? And it's like, well, no, you can want both of these things. You can want your civil liberties protected, and you can want, you to be safe while those are being protected. And so I think from the software perspective, we take the view that you shouldn't have to make that choice either. It should be a scalable platform on which people can build their own software, but it should also be flexible enough to then be bespoke and configurable and fit for purpose for work that really, really matters, right? You shouldn't, if you go around and look at sort of like how many different workflows people use software for that it was not designed to do, and I know this is recorded, so I'm not going to call things out by name, but everyone can think of these things in your either personal or professional life where you're like, wow, this was definitely not designed for this purpose. Again, if we go back to what we've designed the software to do, it's like we've designed this software to help people in complicated worlds make decisions. That's a horizontal problem, but the decisions they have to make are vertically specific, right? So you have to have that flexibility of looking at a nonconformity of an avionics harness as you're building a plane is different than monitoring a pipeline for fugitive emissions. Both things really matter, and so I would say it's both.
So my question here was, but should we think of Palantir being as an horizontal company? Horizontal software is something that is widely used, general, or something vertical, like very specific to an industry, a use case. And from these words from Matt, really wow, that's so nice to hear, because it matches perfectly what Shama shared last week. Into we accept no compromise. We believe that the extremes can be joined, and actually it is when you try to do something that seems not to talk each other that you achieve superiority. He mentioned precisely these words, all the value comes from the contradiction. What makes you a very special company is the ability to do things that seem in opposition to each other. And this theme of Palantir, unlocking stuff that seems not to talk with each other, is something that is like a recurring pattern.
Yeah.
It's like the fractal. It's like
I mean, it's
Palantir.
literally the basis of the company. Carp and Teal, two politically different people, two peas in a pod. It works somehow.
But together, they find a way to make something that is superior to both of them.
Right.
Government and commercial. They don't talk to each other, but in reality, Palantir works. Engineering culture, sales culture, efficiency versus privacy, coding, which is like very strict versus art. And now again, horizontal software versus vertical software, something that typically a company is like horizontal, like Salesforce, more or less the Salesforce you buy for Chrysler is more or less the same software you buy for a food company. But on the other side is as vertical, because the software you use for BP to help optimize the oil rig is completely different from the use case you want to use to target a terrorist. But the beauty of the platform is being able to do both at an excellent point. So I believe that this stuff is not only cool to see, but also makes us think philosophically into life. Where is value?
It's and that's one of the beautiful things about the company. I think we'll end it here, but the company is a philosophy in and of itself, and now we're seeing the results of that philosophy manifested through the execution. It's a contradiction, as Sham said, but it's a beautiful contradiction.
We are degenerates and smart investors.
They came together, they all won when it comes to Palantir. The degens and the smart ones ended up not getting this one too wrong so far. All right. That's it for us, folks. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for spending your hard-earned time with us. Just like time is the one thing you can't get back, and we appreciate you guys spending it with us on these Friday episodes. Everyone's Twitter and YouTube is in the description. Please make sure to follow everybody to continue to get updates on Palantir. And we'll be back for episode 151 next Saturday to discuss Palantir, and we'll keep going from there. That's it. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you
Good night.
all. Great seeing you.
Yeah.